Guess what this video is about? Full spectrum cameras. What? What? Ooh. Oh, pretty. Ooh.
Greetings, programs. What's going on? Thanks for stopping by. Let's just get into it. So this video is about full spectrum cameras. Now, these cameras have been popular in the paranormal community for maybe like 10-15 years, but they've been around, at least on a consumer level, since about like 1998, when Sony released the first handycams with the night shot feature. And for those of us that were around for that was a fun time. More on that later, though. When they were first marketed to ghost hunters, the full spectrum camera was like the next K2 meter. I mean, everyone had to have one, and you saw people rushing out and spending like $200 or $300 on a camera that was modified to be a full spectrum camera. Kind of like this one, you know, like this. This is a full spectrum. Well, not really. We'll get into that later. Ever since then, they kind of lost popularity. You know, they're not completely gone, but people are still using them. I still see them on some ghost hunting TV shows. I still see ghost hunting teams using them. I still see them on, like, not necessarily the cameras, but I see the pictures from the full spectrum cameras on various websites and social media things. So they're still out there. They're definitely still being used. And I was going to do a show on this. I was going to do a video on this like a while ago, probably years ago, but I got distracted with other, things, squirrel, and other projects. Just, they took up my time, and it kind of got put on the back burner. Well, not back burner, but on the back of the copybook that I write my notes in. However, a recent online debate I was involved in brought the idea back into this big freaking head of mine. You know I love a good debate. This really wasn't a good one. A certified paranormal investigator, informed his followers that a full spectrum camera records the entire EMF spectrum, and that's why they can capture images of ghosts and other dimensional beings. Like, that was the actual quote. He really fucking said that. Wow. What the there is so much wrong with that statement. So I politely corrected him, since, he made a mistake. EMF, in this case, stands for electromagnetic field, which is an electric and magnetic force field that surrounds a moving electric charge. And I've talked about that before. I actually wrote an article about EMF for ghost hunters, which has a lot more detailed information. When my ghost hunting peeps out there, you turn on these devices and you walk around a room, that's what you're measuring. You're measuring the EMF. You're measuring the electromagnetic field, actually the strength of that field in the area, and it's given off by a lot of the power sources, the wiring in the walls, and other electrical devices like your phone and walkie-talkies and stuff like that. What the guy should have said is, quote, slightly larger part of the EM spectrum, unquote. Drop off the F from the EMF, because you're not dealing with the field, you're dealing with the electromagnetic spectrum, which is the name given to the entire range of wavelengths or frequencies of electromagnetic radiation, extending from gamma rays, which is tiny, to the longest radio waves, which is big. Visible light is actually a teeny weeny slice of that range, kind of in the middle of the graph that you'll see up here. So after I corrected him online on a public post, my new friend responded to me. The part of my friend will be played by Donna Biddle.
Okay, smartass, the entire EM spectrum? Happy now?
Not quite. No, I wasn't really happy, because it was still wrong, and I actually went on to make him even less happier than I was, which made me feel better. But all in all, it actually put the idea back into my head, hence this video that we're doing. So let's take a look at full spectrum cameras. Let's see how they work. In basic terms, it's a camera that has been modified so that it can record more light from the near-infrared spectrum. That part of the spectrum between like 750 nanometers and about 2500 nanometers. That's the near-infrared part. You see, the sensors in our digital cameras, they're sensitive to a lot more light than what we can see, what our eyes can see. In fact, they're so sensitive that they can pick up wavelengths from about 350 nanometers in the ultraviolet side of things to about 1050 nanometers in the longer infrared side. On a side note, most manufacturers, when they list the specifications for, I guess, for ease of use, they give it as 400 to 1,000 nanometers. I don't know if like the 5 fucks them up or something, but they leave it off. I don't know. So the main point of that is that your camera, your digital cameras, can see a lot more light than what you would think they can. And it really, really is cool. And a good example to show you is that when you would take like an old remote like this, like an old remote that has that LED in it, you can hold it here. I'm going to turn off the light so you can see it better, but you can push one of the buttons and you'll see that the light blinks. And this is because the camera, the webcam that I'm using, can see infrared. The digital sensor can actually see it, which is really cool. Pew, 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 pew. Pew, 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 pew. Now, the reason it doesn't see a lot of infrared light is because all these cameras, all the digital cameras, have what's called an IR cut filter. And that is a little piece of glass that's usually over top of the sensor, like this one. This is from my Nikon D60 that I took out yesterday because I wanted to convert it into a full spectrum camera. So this is coated with some chemicals, and it has properties where it will block out pretty much wavelengths from 700 nanometers to 1200 nanometers, and that's within the near infrared spectrum, and it blocks out that light. Otherwise, when you take pictures without that filter, you get color distorted images. You usually get something like it has like a pink or a reddish or sometimes like a purplish tint to it. And there's also the problem because infrared light goes through a lot of stuff like shrubbery and leaves and grass. It goes through it and it doesn't give you the color, so they appear distorted. If you've ever seen infrared pictures of like wooded areas or fields, you'll see it looks like snow because all the tree leaves and the grass and stuff, they don't have any of the green color. That's why you have these IR cut filters on your digital cameras, so it color corrects so that the final image looks like what you're looking at with your eyes. Now, I just did the trick with the remote control, pointing at the camera so you can actually see, you can see the light. Right? There it is. There it is. You can see the light blinking. But to show you, even though that the webcam actually has a filter on it, it still allows a little bit of light through. But when I do this, I'm going to do a little experiment for you. When I take the filter that I took out of my Nikon earlier and put it over top of the light, I'm going to turn the light out again for you. Blink that up. Look at this. Watch. Gone. Gone. Wee, sweet. It does such a good job at blocking. Well, it's pretty much it's a double filter because it's got the filter in the webcam, and now I'm putting another filter in here, and it blocks out the light completely, and that's what you're getting. That's why the trick works. So when that IR cut filter is removed, it's often replaced with a clear filter. This allows your camera to see all the way up until like that 1050 nanometers of the near infrared light, and it also protects the camera sensor because you don't want the sensor being just, you know, naked, because that's not cool. So after being modified, your camera goes from seeing this much to seeing this much. That's like almost double the amount of light. That's a lot there. So you can see why it's beneficial to photographers. And then all you need to do, if you want to change it up, you can put filters on it. You can put filters on it that block visible light, or you can block infrared light, UV light. You can do whatever you want. You can mix and match and pretty much do, you know, whatever suits you. Then there are two kinds of conversions that you can do, and that's what I know them as, and most of the photographers that you're going to ask, they know these full spectrum cameras as full spectrum conversion cameras because they're converted. And basically, the first one is what we've been describing. We take out the IR cut filter inside, and we replace it with a clear filter. That way you see all the light. You see UV, visible, and infrared. You get it all. The second kind of conversion replaces the internal filter with not a clear one, but with a visible light filter. It actually filters out visible light. One of the cameras that I got, this one, this was a gift from a friend of mine, Carolyn. This was advertised as a full spectrum camcorder, but unfortunately, it came with this filter inside of it, and this is a visible light filter. You can't see through it. Even when I put it on my eye, I can see the ring light that I have behind the camera, but it blocks out most of your visible light. And it was actually right in the lens right here. So I'll put it back where I found it so you can see. So it was like that. It was right in there, that little thing. So basically what this camera was, even though it was advertised as a full spectrum camera, it wasn't, because it was blocking out visible light and only letting in the near infrared light and a little bit of UV. So not a true full spectrum camera. All right, so there's one more thing I want to get to before I circle back to the comments of the certified paranormal investigator that really kicked off this video. And what I want to get back to is the Sony Handycam that came out in 1998. And this was like the first version. When I started researching this project, that really popped up. That really hit me as like, oh, this is the first version of, you know, full spectrum use by consumers, you know, by little people, not professional TV crews, but, you know, the rest of us. So in 1998, Sony released Handycams, which had a feature called Night Shot, and it was the first time this came out like this, and people were excited because you could take video at night, which was really cool. There was I think there were a bunch of models. I think there were 6 models, and the lowest one was the TR940, and then the high end one was the TRV 940. And I'm going to throw a picture up on the screen, maybe right in front of me, so you can see it. So that's what it is. All right, so I couldn't have verified the exact process that was taking place in the Sony Handycams, but I do recall talking to a friend of mine that was a photographer. He was a professional photographer and videographer. He did a lot of events and stuff, and he's also a tech junkie. He still is. So if there was like a new piece of equipment that was coming out that was announced, he was the first in line. So this guy has it all. He has all the original stuff of everything that ever came out in the entire history of electronics. So with that said, we broke it down because there was a big thing about the Sony Handycams with the Night Shot. The big stir, the big like newsworthy event that happened was that with this Night Shot, if you used it during the day, you could see through some clothing, and it got everybody, you know, got the general public up in arms, because it was like, holy shit, you know, all these pervs are going to get a hold of this and start taking pictures or a video of people and you know, showing them naked. But it wasn't that bad. I mean, it could see through some clothing, like bathing suits, very thin material. Also, like thin t-shirts that were black really had a problem, because you could put like pictures or something. And there's a lot of videos on YouTube where you can look it up and see like picture videos where someone has put a book underneath a black t-shirt, or like a design underneath somebody's shirt, and they turn the night vision on and you can see through it, which is really interesting. I mean, it's cool. it's yeah. So anyway, Sony had fixed that. They changed the software with the next version that came out so that you could no longer do that. Well, you could, you just had to do it in a roundabout way. But anyway, the only reason I wanted to talk about this is because I touched on it in the beginning of the video, and I wanted to explain, you know, why this had anything to do with this video. And the conversation that I had with my photographer buddy, it was that they basically used a full spectrum version, an early version, where they would take a camera, and it was basically, I'll use one of the video cameras. I have a Sony camera, but I don't have, this isn't the model, but basically there was a switch on the side, and it was for the Night Shot, and as you flip the switch up, it was in the path of the video feed, of the light coming in to hit the sensor. So what we found was happening was that the IR cut filter inside was in front of the sensor. It was in the path of light coming through, and once you flip that switch up, it actually rolled mechanically the filter out of the way, and that way infrared light could come in, more infrared light could reach the sensor. So again, I just wanted to touch on that because I had mentioned it in the beginning of the video, and I want to swing back to it. So now let's get back to what the certified ghost hunter was telling us. I'm sorry, certified paranormal investigator, because apparently there's a difference. All right, so his original statement was that full spectrum cameras record the entire EMF spectrum, and that's why they can capture images of ghosts and other dimensional beings. There's still so much wrong with that. Anyway, so because I had corrected him and we had a little debate, you know, we dropped the F. So the edited version of his statement is that Full spectrum cameras record the entire EM spectrum, and that's why they can record images of ghosts and dimensional beings and demons and fairies and pixies and shit like that. So the problem with that is that it's a false statement. It does not. These cameras do not record the entire EM spectrum. It can't. It can record a little bit. So basically, here's the EM spectrum. This is a graph that represents the EM spectrum from radio waves to gamma rays. It's all there. And in the middle, there's this little section. It's a very little section. It's visible light and a little bit of near infrared light, and that's what these cameras record. These cameras are not magical. They do not record X-rays, radio waves, far infrared, gamma rays. They don't record them. So it does not record the entire EM spectrum. And I want to make that clear because for the most part, I think people get it. But I've also come across a lot of ghost hunters or paranormal enthusiasts that do believe these cameras record everything, like the entire spectrum. And it's simply not true. Something else to keep in mind when using these cameras, because most of them come in, they're small like this, or there's one here like this. So both of these are full spectrum cameras that were converted by other people. This was professionally done by a store, and then this one was done by me. So the problem is that they usually tend to slow down the shutter speed, which means that you're going to get a lot of blurring. You're going to get a lot of distortion, motion blur, because these cameras are designed for visible light. That's why they have a filter, and they're calibrated. That's the word. They're calibrated for visible light, not infrared light, which is a longer wavelength. So sometimes you might, especially if you do it yourself and you don't correct for focus, you're going to get blurry images like this, and it just can't focus because the wavelengths are longer, so they're different than visible light. It's different from what it's used to. Also, because you're usually in dark situations. Ghost hunts are usually done in the dark, and most people won't use visible light because you're in the dark, obviously. You'll use infrared or UV lights, which sometimes is just not enough because, again, your camera, and more specifically your camera software and the sensors that it's using, is looking for visible light to try to tell you, okay, is there enough light? Do I need the flash? Do I need to keep the shutter open longer? For instead of like 1/60th of a second, should I keep it open for a second or 2 seconds? So this causes a lot of problems because the impression is that, oh, I have a full spectrum camera, I don't need a light. And therefore, I see a lot of ghost hunters who post their pictures that they take with this camera on websites and social media, and there's no flash. There's no other light sources used. They're just taking pictures in the dark. And you're getting a lot of motion blur because it's like 2-second pictures, because it's basically going click and the camera opens. It's taking the picture for 2 seconds, and anybody that's moving in the scene, if you're hand holding it, everything in the scene is going to get blurry. It's just going to move around. You're going to get what's called motion blur. Or camera shake. It depends. I mean, if you have a teammate that's walking through the scene while you're taking a picture, you're going to get motion blur because that person is going to look like they're elongated, and or in certain situations they're going to look like they're very skinny, like a Slender Man kind of thing. In other situations, because you're hand holding the camera most of the time and it's dark and it's not enough light and it extends the shutter, your motion of just holding it, because we never hold it steady. That's why instructions always tell you to use like a tripod when you're doing long exposures. But if you're holding it, you're going to do camera shake, which is going to shake everything. So all the sharp edges in the scene, in your image, they're going to turn fuzzy. Some are going to become transparent. It's weird. It's a weird effect. Sure, you're going to get a lot of that. And it's going to be worse with full spectrum cameras because if you don't know what you're doing with it, if you're not aware of the capabilities and drawbacks to it, you're gonna screw up and get some false positive images. The last thing I want to bring up here is the last part of the statement of the certified ghost hunter that I was debating with, because he claims that these cameras, because they're modified, can see ghosts and other dimensional beings. And my response is like, seriously? I mean, There are millions and millions of security cameras in use around the world. I mean, you have warehouses, businesses, historical sites, battlefields, hospitals, museums, private homes, all of this stuff. And there's security cameras everywhere that employ infrared technology. It uses it because it uses night vision. That's why we see the infrared night vision. We see the ring of infrared light LEDs around the cameras. I have 8 cameras, an 8-camera system that I can use. So even ghost hunting teams are using them. If that's all it took, just a little bit more infrared light, if that's all it took to see ghosts, damn, we would have so much spiritual, spooky footage that it would have its own YouTube channel. We could call it BooTube. But seriously, I mean, it when you think about it that way, it really falls apart. It doesn't mean, just because you can see a little bit more light does not mean that they can see ghosts and demons and stuff. Besides the fact that those entities have not been proven to exist. Something I've said pretty much every video I've ever done, every podcast I've ever done. So I know I'm beating a dead horse with that. So that's it. Let's move on to the conclusion. My final words on this is, depending on your use, depending on what you want to use it for, full spectrum cameras can either be an artistic tool or a very expensive novelty. Now, for photographers, I mean, the conversion makes for stunning photos. I mean, some of these things, it's just amazing. They blow my mind. I love it, which is why I converted my camera, this camera, into a full spectrum. I took out the IR cut filter so I can see everything. I can see everything that this sensor can see, which is great. And I usually use an infrared filter on it, which is confusing. Infrared filter like this actually means infrared pass filter, so it lets in light above 720 nanometers, but it blocks out visible light, so I get really good infrared pictures. So yeah, if you're a photographer, if you're thinking about doing it, I say go ahead, do it. You know, spend the money to have it converted professionally, or if you're really handy and you don't mind, you know, the chance you might fuck it up, do it yourself, like I did. Now, for ghost hunters, for my ghost hunting peeps out there, my buddies, this is a very expensive novelty that you really don't need. If you don't understand it, if you don't understand the workings, I mean, this video gave you a basic idea, but it's not everything. I didn't cover every little detail, so there's still a lot to learn. But it's very expensive. I'm looking at a list on my other screen here, and they're going from like, they're still going at like $170. There's $240. There's $340. Holy crap, they're expensive. Wow. And those range from either like let's see, Sony like HD Handycams to even like small little cheap cameras, like smaller than this, that you can get for like $20. They're selling them for a couple hundred, so it's not really worth it, honestly. Because most of the time you'll end up with some pictures that are blurry, dark. You don't know what they are, and like I've come across photo albums at conferences on like a ghost hunter table where it was just like, oh, full spectrum ghosts, and it's filled with pictures of motion blurred teammates that are labeled ghosts, and it's ridiculous. So I wouldn't even bother, honestly. I would pass it by. Spend your money on something else. Spend your money on some books. Here, look, I have books over here that are much better. Investigative reporting, that's a great one. Helps you investigate mysteries. Access public records, awesome book. Ooh, here you go. Digital photography. It's a complete book. Buy this instead. This is probably, I don't even know how much I paid for this. I got it cheap because it's a little old, a couple years old, but it's still awesome, and it's much cheaper than a full spectrum camera that you're probably going to. It's probably going to sit in your Pelican case much more than you're going to use it. And another book I got, Infrared Photography Handbook. It tells me all about infrared photography. It's really cool. So none of those were paid endorsements. Nobody paid me to do that. I wish they would, though. But anyway, that's it. That's all I got. And I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you learned something. I hope you gained some knowledge. And I hope I got everything right. I'm pretty sure I did. But if I didn't, I'm sure you guys will let me know in the comments. And as always, if you like this video, if you like the other video, go check out the other videos. Subscribe to the channel. Give me a thumbs up, because it tells me that people are watching and you're liking it. And that's it. If you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a message. You can find me on Facebook at I am Kenny Biddle. That's my Facebook page, the blog page. You can also find me on YouTube. And that's it. Yeah, nothing else except never stop learning.